The Arizona sun was a relentless hammer, beating down on the dusty town of Redemption. For Eliza, who had arrived only 3 months prior, the heat was a constant, oppressive reminder of how far she was from the cool, green hills of her home back east. She worked as a maid at the Blackwood Ranch, the largest and most prosperous in the county. The main house was an imposing 2-story structure of dark wood and wide verandas, a stark monument to wealth in a land defined by scarcity. Her employer, Martha Blackwood, was as unforgiving as the landscape. A woman whose beauty had begun to curdle with bitterness, she ruled her household with a quiet, venomous authority. Every polished floorboard, every gleaming piece of silver, was a battlefield where Eliza fought a losing war against Mrs. Blackwood's impossible standards. A speck of dust on the mantelpiece earned a condescending sigh, a misplaced doily, a sharp, cutting remark that echoed in Eliza's mind for days. Eliza's only solace was the small, plain dress she kept carefully wrapped in linen at the bottom of her trunk. It was the color of a desert wildflower, a simple calico that her mother had helped her sew before she left. It was her last tangible link to a kinder world, a promise of a life beyond servitude. With the annual Founders' Day dance approaching, the dress became her secret hope. For one night, she dreamed of being more than just the Blackwoods' maid. She imagined a few hours of music, laughter, and perhaps a kind word from a stranger. One afternoon, as Eliza was airing out her room, Mrs. Blackwood appeared in the doorway, her eyes, cold as river stones, immediately fixing on the dress laid out on the bed. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain as she picked up the fabric between her thumb and forefinger as if it were something soiled. It's for the Founders' Day dance, ma'am," Eliza replied, her voice barely a whisper. A cruel smile touched Mrs. Blackwood's lips. "A dance for you?" She let the fabric drop. "You should be more concerned with the state of the parlor floors than with social gatherings. Some people forget their place." The words were a slap, a clear and deliberate strike meant to wound. Eliza felt a familiar hot shame creep up her neck, but she said nothing. She simply folded her dress, the wildflower-colored calico suddenly feeling fragile and foolish, and placed it back in the trunk, the lid closing with a soft, final thud. The hope for the dance dimmed, but it wasn't extinguished just yet. The day of the Founders' Day dance arrived with the oppressive heat of the Arizona sun, which beat down on the parched earth of the Blackwood Ranch. The air was thick with dust and the lowing of cattle, but for Eliza, the day felt unnaturally quiet, each moment stretched thin by the memory of Mrs. Blackwood's sneering face. She went about her chores with a mechanical efficiency, her hands scrubbing and sweeping while her mind was a world away. She could still feel the phantom weight of her employer's scorn, a chill that lingered despite the sweltering temperature. From the shade of the porch, leaning against a sturdy timber post, William Blackwood watched her. He was a stark contrast to his mother's sharp, restless energy. Where Martha was a storm, William was the calm that followed, quiet, steady, with eyes that saw more than he ever spoke. He whittled a piece of scrap wood, the shavings falling in soft curls around his worn leather boots. He'd seen the confrontation over the dress, had heard his mother's venomous words from the barn. He hadn't intervened, not then. That wasn't his way. But he'd noted the flicker of unbroken spirit in Eliza's eyes, a resilience that his mother, for all her power, could never seem to extinguish. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep purple, Eliza finished her last task. She retreated to the suffocating stillness of her small room, the calico dress lying neatly on her cot. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Every cruel word echoed in her ears, telling her she was foolish, that she had no place among decent folk. But then a different feeling rose within her, not defiance, but a simple, profound need to claim one small piece of joy for herself. She had made the dress, and she would wear it. It was hers. She washed her face with the cool water from the basin, her reflection looking tired but determined. After changing into the dress, she slipped out of the ranch house, avoiding the main path. The sounds of celebration grew louder as she approached the small, bustling town of Redemption. Lanterns cast a warm, inviting glow from the windows of the saloon, their light spilling onto the dusty street where wagons were hitched. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the swinging doors. The room was alive with the scrape of a fiddle, loud laughter, and the stomp of boots on the wooden floor. She saw cowboys and their families, townsfolk and merchants. And across the room, seated at a prominent table, was Martha Blackwood, her face a mask of cold judgment. Standing near the bar, observing everyone, was William. His eyes found hers across the crowded room, and for a fleeting second, she saw not pity, but something akin to respect. The music swelled, but for Eliza, the room fell silent. The stage was set. The moment Eliza stepped over the threshold of the saloon, the lively noise seemed to swell and then recede, like a wave pulling back from the shore. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust, stale beer, and sweat, a stark contrast to the clean, dry air of the ranch. A fiddle sawed away in the corner, and men in dusty hats clapped and stomped their boots. For a fleeting second, she was just another face in the crowd. She found a small, shadowed space near the wall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, feeling the simple cotton of her dress as a fragile shield. But a shield is no defense against a predator who knows its prey. Across the room, Martha Blackwood's laughter died on her lips. She set her whiskey glass down with a sharp click, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. She saw not just her maid, but a blatant act of defiance. Murmuring a sharp word to her husband, who barely looked up from his cards, she began to move through the crowd. Like a ship parting the waves, the townsfolk and cowboys stepped aside, their curiosity piqued. The music faltered as Martha stopped before Eliza. The silence that spread was heavy and expectant. "Well, well," Martha's voice dripped with scorn, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I didn't realize we were inviting barn rats to the party. What do you think you're doing here, girl?" Eliza's throat was too dry to speak. She simply stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And in that rag," Martha sneered, her gaze raking over the dress Eliza had poured so much hope into. "You steal my time to sew this pathetic thing, and then you have the audacity to wear it in public." She reached out and pinched the fabric of the sleeve between her thumb and forefinger. The cowboys who flanked Martha began to chuckle, sensing the start of some cruel entertainment. With a sudden, vicious twist, Martha ripped her hand away. The sound of tearing cotton was like a gunshot in the tense quiet. A long, gaping tear now ran down Eliza's sleeve. Eliza flinched, a silent gasp escaping her lips, but she did not cry out. Her stoicism only seemed to enrage Martha further. "You will learn your place," she spat, grabbing the delicately sewn neckline. With another savage pull, she tore the front of the bodice. The cowboys' low chuckles erupted into full-throated, jeering laughter. They hooted and slapped their thighs, entertained by the complete and utter humiliation of the quiet maid. From a table in the corner, William Blackwood had watched the entire scene unfold, his face an unreadable mask. But as the sound of that laughter, so callous, so brutal, filled the room, something inside him snapped. He saw his mother's unbridled cruelty and the gleeful faces of the men who worked for him, and a cold, quiet rage settled over him. He rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and unnervingly calm. The laughter began to die down as he walked forward, not towards his mother, but towards the mocking cowboys. His eyes were like chips of ice, and his hand fell to rest, naturally and purposefully, on the worn leather grip of the pistol at his hip. The raucous laughter of the cowboys was a wave of sound that crashed over Eliza, each jeer a fresh cut. But then a single metallic click sliced through the din. It was sharp, precise, and utterly final. The sound of a revolver's hammer being cocked. The laughter died instantly, choked off in the throats of the men who had been reveling in her humiliation. Every head in the saloon swiveled towards the source of the sound. William Blackwood stood perfectly still, his face a mask of cold fury. His hand rested on the grip of his Colt, his thumb holding the hammer back. He wasn't aiming at anyone, but he didn't need to. The threat was as clear as the polished steel of the weapon. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over the now silent cowboys, who shifted uncomfortably, their bravado evaporating under his gaze. "The show is over," William said, his voice low but carrying with chilling authority across the room. His mother, Martha, stared at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "William, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Put that away this instant." William's gaze shifted from the cowed ranch hands to his mother. For the first time, there was no trace of the quiet, obedient son she knew. "You've had your amusement, Mother," he said, the words sharp as broken glass. "It ends now." He slowly, deliberately, lowered the hammer on his pistol without holstering it. Then he began to walk. He didn't stride. He moved with a purpose that parted the stunned crowd like a ship through water. He walked directly to Eliza, who stood frozen, trembling amidst the tatters of her dress, her dreams in shreds at her feet. He stopped in front of her, his tall frame shielding her from the prying eyes of the town. Without a word, he unbuttoned his heavy canvas duster, the one stained with the dust of the Arizona trails. He shrugged it off and gently draped it over her shoulders. The coat was heavy, warm, and smelled of leather and the open range. It enveloped her, hiding the ruined dress and offering a protection that was as shocking as it was profound. "Come," he said softly, his voice meant only for her. He offered his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Eliza placed her trembling hand on his sleeve. William turned, and without a backward glance at his furious mother or the stunned saloon, he led Eliza out of the suffocating heat and into the cool, clear silence of the desert night. The swinging doors closed behind them, leaving a room full of whispers and a family irrevocably fractured. The stagecoach left Eliza coughing in a cloud of ochre dust, a stark and gritty welcome to the Arizona territory. Before her, the Blackwood Ranch house wasn't just a home. It was a fortress carved into the unforgiving landscape, its dark timber frame seeming to absorb the relentless sun. With her small, worn carpet bag in hand, she felt a tremor of fear mixed with a desperate sliver of hope. This was a new beginning, a chance to earn her keep far from the sorrows she'd left behind. Martha Blackwood stood on the porch, a severe figure silhouetted against the harsh afternoon light. She wasn't waiting to welcome Eliza. She was waiting to inspect her. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, raked over Eliza's travel-worn dress and dusty boots with undisguised disdain. "So, you're the new girl," she said, her voice thin and sharp as a shard of glass. "From back east," they said. "Don't expect any niceties here. This is a working ranch, not a tea party. You work hard, you stay quiet, and you might just last." Eliza swallowed, her throat dry from the dust and nerves. "Yes, ma'am. I'm a hard worker." From the corner of her eye, she saw a man in the shade of the stables, mending a leather strap. He was tall and lean, with the quiet posture of someone who spent more time listening than speaking. He looked up as his mother spoke, and his gaze met Eliza's for a fleeting second. There was no warmth in it, but there was a flicker of something else, resignation, perhaps, or a deep-seated weariness. That was William. He offered no greeting, his eyes dropping back to his work as if the brief connection was a risk he couldn't afford. Mrs. Blackwood didn't miss the glance. "William, stop dawdling and see to the new horses." "And you," she snapped, turning back to Eliza, "your room is in the back by the kitchen. It's small, you'll get used to it. The wash needs doing before sundown. Don't be idle." She turned and swept back into the house without a backward glance, the screen door slamming shut with an air of finality. Left alone on the porch, Eliza took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of dust, horses, and dry heat. The room was little more than a closet with a cot, but it was hers. As she looked out the small, grimy window at the vast, indifferent expanse of land stretching to the horizon, she clutched the fabric of her worn dress. It would be hard. Mrs. Blackwood was a storm cloud, and her son was a silent shadow. But the sun would set, and it would rise again. For now, that had to be enough. The Arizona sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the dust-choked land of the Blackwood Ranch. For Eliza, each day began before its first rays crested the distant mesas, and ended long after the last light had bled from the sky. Her life was a litany of chores, governed by the cold, clipped commands of Mrs. Martha Blackwood. It was a world of lye soap, splintered floorboards, and the constant, quiet ache of loneliness. Mrs. Blackwood's cruelty wasn't always loud. Often it was a subtle poison, a dismissive glance at Eliza's mended apron, a sharp sigh at a moment's hesitation. Her son, William, moved through the house like a shadow, his eyes downcast, a silent witness to his mother's reign. Hope arrived in the form of a faded flyer Eliza saw tacked to the general store's wall during a rare trip for supplies. Founders' Day Dance, it proclaimed in bold, optimistic letters. The words sparked something dormant within her. A dance. A night of music, laughter, and light, a world away from the oppressive quiet of the ranch house. The idea took root, a wild, tenacious flower growing in the cracks of her grim reality. She had nothing to wear, of course. But in a forgotten corner of the pantry, she found a set of sturdy, clean flour sacks. The cotton was rough, but it was unblemished. In the precious, stolen moments of her nights, by the flickering light of a single tallow candle, Eliza began her work. Her needle, a treasured gift from her own mother, rose and fell, turning the humble sacks into something more. She unraveled old threads for color, sewing a simple pattern of desert wildflowers along the hem. Each stitch was a prayer, an act of defiance. The dress wasn't just fabric. It was the physical form of her yearning for a single night of simple, human joy. One evening, lost in her work, she didn't hear the soft creak of the floorboards behind her. "And what is this pathetic thing?" The voice was like ice. Eliza froze, her heart seizing in her chest. Mrs. Blackwood stood in the doorway, her face a mask of contempt as she stared at the nearly finished dress laid out on Eliza's cot. She stepped forward, picking up the garment between her thumb and forefinger as if it were something soiled. "You, going to a dance?" A dry, mirthless laugh escaped her lips. "Don't be a fool, girl. Your place is here. Remember that." She dropped the dress back onto the cot, the simple cloth crumpling under the weight of her scorn, and swept out of the room, leaving Eliza trembling in the sudden, suffocating silence. The silence that followed the gunshot was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The laughter had died in the Cowboys' throats, replaced by wide-eyed shock. Martha Blackwood stared at her son, her face a mask of disbelief cracking to reveal the venom beneath. William didn't waver. His gun was still pointed at the ceiling, a clear and final punctuation to the evening's cruelty. His other arm remained a protective barrier in front of Eliza. "There will be no more laughter at her expense," William said, his voice low and cold, cutting through the thick air of the dance hall. He slowly lowered the pistol, but his eyes remained locked on his mother. "Not tonight, not ever again." He turned his back on her then, a dismissal more profound than any insult. Shrugging off his formal coat, he gently draped it over Eliza's trembling shoulders. The heavy wool was a comfort, covering the tatters of her dress and shielding her from the prying eyes that now filled with pity and awe. He took her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Come, Eliza, let's go." He led her out of the hall, the crowd parting for them like water. No one dared to speak. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves against the dusty road. The moon cast long shadows, but for the first time, Eliza didn't feel like she was hiding in them. She felt seen. They didn't go back to the main house. William led her to the small bunkhouse reserved for itinerant hands, lighting a single lantern that cast a warm, golden glow. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice softer now, filled with a regret that seemed years deep. "I can't stay here, not after this." Eliza looked up at him, the lantern light catching the unshed tears in her eyes. "Where will we go?" The word "we" hung in the air, a question and a hope. "I have some money saved," William explained, his gaze earnest. "Enough to get us to Prescott. We can find work, a new start, a place where a person's worth isn't measured by who their family is." He paused, his expression softening further. "A place where you can make a new dress and wear it to any dance you please without fear." In that moment, the shredded flour sacks no longer mattered. The laughter was a fading echo. All that mattered was the promise in his eyes. She gave a single, determined nod. Before the sun could cast its first gray light over the Blackwood Ranch, they were gone. They left with little more than the clothes on their backs and a shared resolve. As their wagon crested the ridge, Eliza looked back one last time at the sprawling ranch house, a dark silhouette against the burgeoning dawn. It was a monument to cruelty and arrogance, and its mistress was now alone within its walls. Ahead of them, the road was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was their own.